Hello and welcome to Agricultural Policy, the podcast. My name is Hansjürg and I'm here today with Josh Baitke. We are trying to shed light on the policy process in the US and Switzerland, especially in agricultural policy. Josh, great to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Today it's March 5th. It's a beautiful morning here. I'm in Denver, Colorado, which is a wonderful part of the country to be in. And always good to talk with you here about agriculture policy and other things going on in the world.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see the latest development. First, we thought we will cover incentive programs in general in agricultural policy. But then we discussed it last time already that President Trump is not very predictable, to put it that way. He imposed tariffs on agricultural goods, amongst others. So we in turn decided to focus in this episode on tariffs, on trade war, and on the discussion, what does it mean? Where does it go? But before doing so, you are normally based in Texas. Now You're in Colorado, in Denver. Traveling. So what were you up to the last couple of days?
The last couple of days, I was at an event called Commodity Classic, and it's a big conference. It's run by leaders of some of the major commodity groups here. So you had leaders from the National Association of Corn Growers, the American Soybean Association, equipment managers, just some of the major groups that advocate for agriculture here. And got to talk to a lot of people. We had some experts on policy, experts on various parts of agriculture, and it's just a good chance for everyone in the industry to get together and learn from each other and network a little bit. So it's a good experience. We just finished stuff last night. A lot of meetings, but it was definitely time well spent.
And how is the mood? I mean, how is the mood in the whole industry?
I think that there's a little optimism. There's also a lot of uncertainty, and that's raising some concerns. You mentioned tariffs at the beginning, and over the past few weeks, there's just been so much going on with the new administration. President Trump is working at a very fast speed to try to change a lot of long-standing United States policies. He's trying to cut spending. He's going through. You probably heard Elon Musk, the businessman. He's been put in charge of this government office called the Department of Government Efficiency, and he's been going through various U.S. agencies and recommending cuts, firing thousands of employees. President Trump's been moving quick to cut back on initiatives to promote diversity, on climate efforts to address climate change. Some of those things have been challenged in court, but we don't have resolution on what's going to stand, what's going to be turned back yet. He's also obviously had kind of taken a much more confrontational approach with some of our longtime allies, including the EU and Canada and Mexico. And then the situation with tariffs. So there's just been so much going on over the past few weeks that it is really hard to keep up and try to really comprehend the full implications of a lot of these policy changes.
So I imagine the people are rather unsure about the closer future, unsure about market developments, and unsure about the role of agricultural policy in general, as a part of their business,
right?
So to say. And what do they make out of it?
I think everybody is like I said, is trying to figure that out, because we go into tariffs, and from President Trump's standpoint, he says basically two things. You hear a lot of different things, but I think the two things you hear most consistently is he believes that he can use tariffs as a tool to somehow make better trade deals from the United States standpoint, and it's also, he believes it's a tool to create more production within the United States. Now, a lot of the economic analysis shows that's going to be hard to do, and I'm very curious to hear, from where you are in Switzerland, kind of how this has been received, because here it's just we don't know what to make of it yet.
Yeah. I have the impression this is like true for everybody. Like, we don't know yet what to make out of it or what to really think of it. I mean, last week, recording on Tuesday or Wednesday, last week, there was this clash with Zelensky in the Oval Office. And from our perspective, and in terms of, and this is appalling, seeing a long-standing ally, the US, now walking away, withdrawing military aid from the Ukraine and leaving Europe almost alone, so to say. So this is much more security policy instead of agricultural policy. So this is what we are seeing now, this shift, this very big shift for the moment at least, in how the security landscape is set together. The EU has very swiftly, under the leadership of Keir Starmer from the UK, found a way to discuss and a format to discuss how to react to these new realities. If you're talking about agricultural policy, then what we see is like this concern that tariffs would harm our export markets. And from a Swiss agricultural and Swiss perspective, it's difficult because our main export partner is the EU mainly for cheese, but also for chocolate and other agricultural products, coffee. The catch is, if the European economy isn't going well, we do have, as a Swiss economy, we do have a big problem. And if the EU economy is not going well because of problems with the biggest trade partner, which is the US, well, it might have an effect on our economy, like not directly, but around the corner. So this makes it very difficult to foresee what is happening now or what is likely to happen. What I can tell for sure is that the nervosity has risen, so it's uncertainty around and discussions. For instance, there was the State Secretariat for Economic Affairs proposed to push for Swiss-US-American free trade agreement. So to get an agreement that we would make trade together, which has been a project 15 years ago. So there is like this question, okay, what do we do now? Well, we could have a new contract to get, let's say, a regulated relationship. We could say, well, we do, as we always do, wait and assess, and then pick the things together. So it is not yet clear. And this makes it very hard, and I believe this is part of the system as well that Trump is using. It's like Steve Bannon had this quote, flood the zone with shit. More or less, it's like being so fast that everybody else gets somewhat confused and doesn't do anything. And that's like the hard part. You have a lot of things to digest if you just look what is coming in.
You know, you're absolutely right, and I think that there's some parallels. You brought up, the meeting with President Zelensky last week, and it's hard to really comprehend how different that is from for the past since the war began. Zelensky's been considered a hero in the United States for the way he's stood up for Ukraine against a much bigger country, and to have the President Trump now, in a way, try to paint him as the aggressor or as a villain is just a total change that, a year ago, nobody from either political party would have taken that approach. And you can say the same thing about, these tariffs now, the trade deals that the U.S. is doing, because, free trade, free and open trade, that has been a longstanding priority for the Republican Party, which President Trump is a member of. That, so we're talking about tariffs on March 4th. Trump has been talking about tariffs for a long time. On March 4th, he went ahead with plans to put 25% tariffs on goods coming to the U.S. from Canada and Mexico. And keep in mind, when Trump was president, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, the trade deal that we have in place with Canada, the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement, was a trade deal that he initiated. So when he said, so
USMCA, right?
Yes, the USMCA. Yeah. So, to come back a few years later and say, complain about this unfair trade deal, it's the trade deal that President Trump, negotiated. So, and at the same time, we also imposed additional tariffs on China. Morning of March 4th, all three nations announced plans to, put retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. And from the agricultural standpoint, this is where a lot of the concern comes in, because those three nations are our three biggest trading partners by far. For example, I think 85% of our potash that we use, farmers use for fertilizer, comes from Canada. And, right now, the farm economy is weak. Farmers have a lot higher costs. A lot of our, legislation governing the programs to support them need to be updated, and those have been stalled in the legislature. And, just inflation in general, they're dealing with really tight margins. And, imposing these tariffs is just, it's going to reduce their export markets. It's going to, raise costs. And President Trump and his new Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, who I actually got to speak with this weekend here in Denver, they both keep telling farmers that we have a plan, that we're gonna support you. There's been talk of a certain amount of government payments going to farmers to offset some of these losses, but looking at the math, it's hard to see how the government can offset these losses, and that's the message you hear from farmers and the leaders of some of these commodity groups. And keep in mind, many of them are supporters of President Trump. President Trump, won based in large part from getting a significant amount of our rural vote. So they tend to want to believe what he's saying and trust him, but at the same time, as these things are becoming a reality, that there's this this uncertainty. Like, okay, well, what is the plan to address this? Because this just doesn't seem to make sense, and I think that's what everybody is trying to figure out at this point.
Yeah, and then there is this idea, like Trump says he does have a plan, like a broader scheme on how to now go ahead. Because the thing is, like, he's imposing tariffs. What is happening now? Well, Canada does retaliatory measures. The EU already announced that they will as well go with some measures as well, like not only dialogue, but also to include retaliatory measures on U.S. goods in one way or the other. So this is now going into a zero-sum game. So one will win, another one will lose. And it seems almost that this zero-sum game is something that is like the basis of Trump's style in negotiating deals and getting things done.
You're exactly right, and that's what you hear from people in his administration, that they say, I've heard many times, don't just look at the tariffs. I think the Agriculture Secretary said this is just one tool in his toolbox to negotiate a better deal. But the problem right now, or I guess the unknown, is we're not sure exactly what the president hopes to get out of this. Like, for example, the official rationale between tariffs on Canada and Mexico were that illegal drugs, the drug fentanyl, was coming over from those countries, and they needed to do a better effort. But almost it's something like less than 2% of the fentanyl coming to the U.S. comes from Canada. So that's, and his rationale has changed. A couple of months ago, we heard talk of, these tariffs are necessary because of illegal immigration. We've heard again about unfair trade deals. So, what exactly President Trump specifically hopes to get out of this kind of remains unclear, and we didn't even mention on Monday of this week, I believe, President Trump also in a social media post announced that he was going to put a tariff on all external agriculture coming into the United States beginning in April. And and the way that is worded, first of all, is a little confusing, and he hasn't clarified that, but the thought is he's going to put a tariff on all agriculture goods coming to the country from anywhere in the world. And
but this is, agriculture. This will be on food or on feed or on everything.
I mean, that's the presumption, but again, with so little clarity, we don't know the amount. We don't know if there's going to be exceptions. All we know is this adds further uncertainty to the market, and this is what has farmers so concerned here. And I'm curious, when that announcement came out, worded that way, what was the reaction in your part of the world? Because I know we were confused, so I can only imagine how that was reacted to there.
Well, it's like, from on one hand side, it's like watching a House of Cards in real life. That's it. That's it for one thing. Seeing an old white guy wearing a suit and not only playing but doing global politics. That's kind of, like the maybe a bit cynical point of view. If it comes to the what is going on with tariffs, what is hard to grasp for me is, we know from studies that tariffs make goods more expensive, just for the sake of it, more or less. Of course, they are here for protection. Of course, they can be used to increase prices of imports or make them less competitive against domestic products, which is the first and foremost reason why tariffs are there. And then, of course, you can use them as leverage for other transactions as well. But still, having tariffs is known as being less efficient in the end, having more expensive goods for customers, so customers don't have enough money left to spend it on other things. Especially if you have poorer population, it really puts a high burden on them to just cover their basic needs. And what is hard for me to understand is why one of the biggest countries, one of the biggest economies on earth, is now going for this approach you would rather expect from a small country somewhere else, like Switzerland, for example, having a strong border protection to further push that limits. But this is something I really don't understand. And then the second part is from studies, it will cost growth, economic growth, and by big numbers. There has been a study done by ETH in last autumn based on the claims during the rally that came to the conclusion for Switzerland the tariffs would cost 200 Swiss francs per person and year, and for the US the GDP would go down by 2 to 3%, which is quite a lot. You would reason it with policy change, and it doesn't seem to be worth to pay that high price, and this is why they don't get together.
And that's exactly what I'm hearing. First of all, I love the House of Cards reference. That's that made me laugh. But when you look at this, that's kind of what is the end game, and if you're for people that still support President Trump, which is roughly half the country, they are still at this point confident, he has a plan. This is going to help. He's a tough negotiator, but everything you hear is, in these broad terms. But, the hard data shows, exactly like you said, the last trade war we had with China, back in 2017, the government ended up paying farmers $23 billion to offset some of the losses, and that didn't even cover all the losses incurred. But I think three things when I think about this that come to mind are, first of all, like I said, right now the farm economy is weak in the United States, and then there's a lot of especially smaller farmers that are struggling to make ends meet. And if we see these higher costs and lower commodity prices for any length of time, those are the people that are going to be most affected, and in jeopardy of losing their farms, and potentially furthering farm consolidation. One of the issues we have in the U.S., are big companies taking over these smaller farms, and you have a greater percentage of the farm economy run by a few of these big corporations, and this would seem to lead directly into that. And then, the second thing I'd say is, talking to, some representatives from the soybean growers and the corn growers, you go back to, some of the trade war we had with China. The United States has still not made up the market share that we lost during that time, because, when China dealing with, the difficult trade of the U.S., they simply went to, Brazil, Argentina, got product from there, and we still haven't, recaptured that market share. And then the third thing is, one of Trump's motivations is to spur domestic production, to have more U.S. production, more U.S. goods. But with the volatility of the changing, he's going to impose this rate at this date changes, with all these changes, companies are still concerned about making long-term investments, changing where they produce, if they're not sure these policies are going to change, next week. So, there's just a lot of confusion. So I think a lot of what you're seeing over there is the same thing, we're trying to comprehend here in the U.S. is like, is this a bluff? Is this something that's going to be long term? And we simply don't know, because the president hasn't told us.
Yeah. And then there is the other thing. I mean, you just mentioned China, and according to some studies, it is believed that China might benefit from this trade war, if you want, from like our perspective in Europe and in Switzerland. What we have to do now is like differentiate our export markets to other countries, and then we can say, well, we go to China, and then we will divert some exports. Europe can take over that before came from the US. This is a realistic scenario. If we look at medium or even long-term developments. However, the other thing is the volatility of the market. I mean, market prices, futures. In Switzerland, we don't use much of futures to trade grains because the market is just too small, too well protected. But in the US, you have a lot of futures, and with the CBOT, at least in Chicago, Board of Trade, an institution that as well issues futures and contracts. So what do you see there coming from the Grain Council and this fair? What do you see there based on prices? Does this insecurity in politics also have an impact on the prices and on the future prices?
Yeah, absolutely. When President Trump came into office and into January and first announced, into January, beginning of February, that he planned to eventually impose these tariffs, we've seen a general downward trend in the price of, corn and soybeans and other commodities. Mm-hmm. But there's also, like you said, a lot of volatility. Like, for example, when on March 4th, when, Canada and China announced some of the retaliatory efforts, you saw a sharp decline that morning. Then you saw, some recovery in the afternoon, but just this up and down. And, as I've heard, farmers tell me, the one thing farmers want is, market stability and a confidence that, they're going to have fair and open trade markets, basically just that they know the rules and are, able to make their, business plans accordingly. And with this volatility, with this uncertainty, you're just seeing, wild swings of people, making a prediction, is this going to be good or is it not? And in a way, I hate to make the comparison, but it's almost, like gambling, and it's you don't know the outcome. You don't really have any concrete knowledge. You're just making your best judgment, and that's the last thing farmers want to base their livelihood is this type of gambling and uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you said already the economy is going slow. But then from a political standpoint, there must be a force somewhere that would take up this uncertainty and frustration and shape it into a new program. Is this already somewhere? Have you seen some initiative in that direction, or someone or some group taking up this opportunity already?
Not yet. I mean, you see some, but as far as the political climate, I think they're just with a variety of things from inflation to some backlash to social change. You had a lot of people in this country that were voted just for something new, that they felt that things were bad. President Biden was not perceived as a very strong president. By the time he came in office, he was aging, and I think a lot of people felt like that was hidden from them until they came out in the debate and they really saw just how old and frail he was. So there was a backlash to what happened during since COVID, and that was a big reason why Trump was elected. And I think that anger is still there, and the opposition would be the Democrat Party, but right now nobody in the Democratic Party has stepped up and captured the nation's attention. We haven't had that Barack Obama like figure that has inspired people and brought people over to that side. So you certainly have these different small groups, protesting President Trump. He gave a speech in front of Congress last night. You had a Democrat congressman was escorted out of the building for protesting some cuts to our Medicare program. But in terms of a mass movement, we haven't, we don't have that yet. You basically have the same people that have been critical of Trump remaining to be, still critical of Trump and calling him out. But a mass, movement with any power, we really haven't seen that yet. And and again, as these policies, go into place, I think if President Trump is to be, if there's anybody's going to stop what he's doing, it's going to take that, groundswell of support to do it. Otherwise, right now, he can pretty much do, almost everything he wants, just with a Congress that is supportive of him and a public that's really not, standing up against him. We've seen some signs, opinion polls that his popularity may be slipping, but not to the point where I'd say he's, in danger of anybody stopping him at this point.
Well, I mean, and of course we have to admit as well that he won the popular vote, and it was not just a slight, thin margin against Kamala Harris in the votes. So he has been elected with quite some margin, which gives him now quite a good leverage to do his stuff
And that's a very interesting thing, because he won it by a larger margin than normal, but in our elections it's typically only a 1 or 2% difference. So while he was only the second Republican in the last 30 years to win the popular vote. He
1.5%, right?
I believe that's correct. Yes, and but so that still means that you have almost half the country was opposed to him. So and then that's this division has kind of driven our politics for the last 10 years or so, and it's that element is
more than
still
before.
there.
Yes, yeah. And then there is the question: what is ahead? I mean, looking at our time already, ahead lies the next episode of our podcast, which will be recorded in about a month. But yeah, what lies ahead of you in the next couple of weeks?
I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but no, I think the budget, the budget battles we're going to be facing here in the country. One of Trump's priorities is cutting the budget. The government didn't pass a full budget last year, so on March 14th, there's a chance that the government will essentially shut down if Congress doesn't come up with a plan to fund the government for the rest of the year. I think there's going to be a short-term plan to do that, but when we really get into the President Trump pushing Congress to cut trillions of dollars from the budget. He's proposed more than $300 billion to cuts to the agriculture department, for example. How that comes into play, and then if Trump also has a plan to offset these tariffs with fewer money, with less money, then it just becomes this, what are we going to end up with? So that's probably going to be the biggest thing over the next couple of months, is just how this budget process goes and hits agriculture. What are you paying attention to? I'm curious. What you'll be watching? Well,
it's interesting. We just had in Parliament this discussion about the budget, the frame of the budget. The federal councillor proposed some cuts in the budget for agriculture, but Parliament denied those cuts, and so therefore we do have some security for planning the next 4 years. I believe what lies ahead is what we will see is a world trying to reorientate itself for. From our perspective, or from the European perspective, I think we'll have a lot of debate on military support to the Ukraine. We will have some discussions about security architecture, the role of NATO, and then we might have as well discussions about tariffs and impact on trade with agricultural goods from a Swiss perspective, mainly in the cheese market, chocolate maybe, and coffee a bit, but from the European perspective, that's difficult to judge. But I believe they will discuss a lot of security architecture and what's going on there. So we will have in 4 weeks from now the next recording. I'm sure we will have enough to talk about not only actualities, but then we might go back to our initial idea of talking about incentive programs and how agricultural policy is trying to, bring people towards one or another direction.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be more than enough to talk about in the next month, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. Yeah, it's a lot going on, that's for sure.
Cool. Thank you, Josh, for this exchange. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show. And
pleasure's all mine. I always enjoy talking to you, Hansjürg.
Cool. So this was it. This was Agricultural Policy, the podcast. Many thanks to listening to us. If you do have feedback, ideas, wishes what we should cover, just hit us an email, send us a comment. Don't forget to subscribe on our platforms, and we wish you a very good day. Thank you very much.